So welcome to the node.js Technical Steering Committee meeting for November 30th, 2022. We will follow our standard agenda, although we only have one item on the agenda with guests. For November 30th. Sorry, and I'm just trying to pause this. Okay. And so we'll just go through the announcements and then we'll dive into that, which is a discussion with some invitees from the foundation and from the OSSF. So before we get started with that, does anybody have any announcements that they'd like to share?
I have one I can toss out.
Sure.
So on December 13th, the LF is hosting an antitrust webinar that I personally am very excited about because we're always forever and on going on about these antitrust notices. And that's something that's can be very confusing for folks who are participating in open collaborations for the first time. When they see those, they, what's that all about? We're doing a training on it on December 13th, and you can head on over to the Linux Foundation.org/webinars URL so that you can take that if you've ever kind of wanted to know what that's all about. There's a little short session for you.
Okay, sounds good. In terms of CPC and board meeting updates, I don't know, Rich, if there's any CPC updates.
Hang on, before we get to that, Beth put in the chat, pointed out that we should announce Raphael being added to the TSC. So yay, we now have 22 members. Raphael is our newest member, and you can, I don't know where he is in the stream, but he's in the Brady Bunch box somewhere. And yeah, CPC, we had a working meeting this week. We didn't have a meeting this week, but the CPC did approve our charter change that I proposed last week. So that's all set, and we no longer have to vote every time we want to add a member. If everybody just simply says, I consent, I agree, that's good enough. And yeah, that's all I have. I don't know if Joe has anything else he'd add to that people should know about CPC activity, or Robin, or anyone else for that matter.
I don't think so. I think we have more work to do on that last working session before we kind of dig into that, but talking about, representation and elections and things like that.
And we'll save the best for last for announcements. But another announcement we have is we're doing OpenJS in Finance, a conference with the Finos FinTech Open Source Foundation next week. Beth Griggs and Daniel Adams are both doing sessions on Node.js. There's a lot of interest in the finance industry from Node.js, and we have Electron reps as well as some other leaders in our community, so it'll be good. And who gets to do the best last announcement? Beth, you want to take it?
I think, are you talking about
Raphael?
Right. I think, well, Rich already did that.
Sorry.
He did.
I guess we could also announce that 19.2.0 is out, and if you're running 19.x, you should update, especially because it has 2 bugs in it that are reverted. So that's exciting. Always great to see us break things and then revert. So yeah, twice this release. So go install that.
Okay. 2 bugs. 2 reverts.
That does not need to be in the minutes, Michael. Come on.
I'm okay. So on to, I think, our main topic, which is Robin asked to come and have a discussion with the foundation and the OSSF. So I'll let you take it from here.
Great, thanks. And I think I'll ask Luke to share the deck. I know I sent it off to all of you beforehand, so I'm going to skip a little bit, but I do want to just pause in the first couple of slides for folks who are watching on YouTube later. There's been a lot of progress since Project Alpha Omega from the OpenSSF granted the Node project a grant last year. We're hoping to do more great things next year. Luke, if you want to go down a slide. For those who haven't been tracking, if you go to the openjsf.org or OpenJS blog, Kylie made a tag and she's done a lot of great work on blogging with Raphael. You can find Node.js security, and you can find a list of all of the blogs that we've published since the grant began. And then again, just to sort of set us up, the grant allowed us to really have some direct resources, which we appreciate a lot. And you can see what a difference they've made. We have a full-time employee from Nearform. Thank you, Paula and Raphael, for your support there. And then we have Trail of Bits at 40 hours a month, and they're doing great work. And so we have this sort of broad scope when we started, but I'm going to hit the next slide and then just share the highlights on what the team has all done. And again, I'm not going to read through all of these, but again, it's pretty, I've been pretty impressed with how fast they've gone. The security working group, a lot of that work is convened under there. Raphael, please free to chip in. And it sounds like more and more folks are joining that working group. And there's a lot of progress in a lot of key areas. I don't know, Raphael, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very the slide is totally correct. We reactivated the security working group, and now we are getting more and more contributors, and even spreading across the working groups in Node.js. For instance, we have Ulysses, who joined at first at security working group, and now he's going to the build team. So that's awesome to see the community. And we also finished 3 of 4 goals that we set when we reactivated the security working group. That's awesome. And all of those initiatives have a direct impact in the end users and even in security research. So I don't know, I see that things is changing. We are improving the security process and also how we deal with vulnerabilities and so on. So that's awesome. Yeah, thanks everybody.
Yeah, I think the one thing that stuck out from me, I don't remember which Michael said it from Project Alpha, is we want to make security cool again. So people sort of come in our wake, right? That they're sort of trailblazing the way. I think we're partially there. I still hear that security is a little bit of a chore. It's still hard to get volunteers. But we're working hard, particularly by sharing all of the great progress to try to recruit more folks to onboard into this work. And then if we start looking at 2023, I met with you all at the TSC earlier, and we sort of started to think about what 2023 could look like. Where could we use support, continued support from Project Alpha? A lot of ideas have been sort of tossed around, and we can talk about some of those. But the one thing I also heard is sometimes we don't know what we don't know. We know a little bit. Is there like a checklist of things that you all are prioritizing? How custom should they be to Node.js as compared to the other projects under the Open SSF umbrella? So that's really why I wanted to bring everyone together and just really make this a discussion. If you want to hit the next slide, Luke, there has been a discussion sort of picked up in the GitHub issue that's linked here. Beth and Raphael and others had some ideas that they thought would be really important. SigStore is one I keep hearing, but I'd just love to kind of open this up for discussion and talk about some of those key areas that you all, meaning the OpenSSF folks, think that we should be sort of looking at in 2023, in addition to that core engineering work.
This is a great list. And I just actually want to start by saying, honestly, thank you to the Node team and community. The previous slide, the work, you were our first engagement. We started out with the Alpha Mega project and had a lot of aspirations and thoughts about what we might do. And we've, unabashedly embraced a spirit of experimentation. And, a good experimentation model is one where you don't know, it doesn't always work. Well, it's working really well with you in particular. And we're really excited to see that progress. My phrase is turning money into security. I feel like this is real progress that's been made. Robin, I like the making security cool again. I'm pretty sure that was the other Michael who said that. But this is great. You know, one of the most interesting topics these days, because it makes total sense and yet nobody knows what it means, is the problem of SBOMs. Like, what does it mean to produce an SBOM for something? Why are you producing it? Who's consuming it? I think these are, you know, and they often sort of relate to the build systems. You know, it's been a while since I built a node.js app, but I imagine that there are a variety of build systems that still get used by different people in different places. How the node community can start to normalize the production of, you know, secure pipelines for building from end to end, where SBOMs are a side effect of that rather than sort of, we must produce SBOMs, is sort of a journey I think worth talking about. Mm-hmm. And so what I think the work that's happened so far is about making Node itself, the framework and the core engines, sort of as secure as possible, and working on that. But you obviously have a huge community of people building applications with Node, and they need to be able to produce secure applications, have secure build processes as well. So I'd love to see that sort of propagation of the learnings and lessons about building Node securely, extending into building Node applications securely. Does that make sense?
Plus one to all of that. I think for the SBOM in particular, I think having Node distributed with the SBOM of things like, you know, V8 and you know, all the other kind of underlying technologies and versions and commits and all that, that to me feels like a much smaller problem than SBOMs for like the NPM ecosystem. But I think that one still like provides a lot of value. You know, I think I'm really optimistic about the permission model. I think that, you know, if as that matures and hopefully becomes used, I would hope that cuts down on a lot of the security risk we have of just kind of rogue modules doing kind of whatever they want. And in particular, you know, one of the things that we are trying to look at within Alpha is, you know, can we take learnings from one ecosystem and help apply them to others? So, you know, permission model is, you know, there would be implementation within Node, but the concept of it would be pretty transferable, I think. So we definitely would like to kind of use our position, you know, to kind of spread those best practices among different critical projects that are, you know, similar to each other. But I'm super optimistic and very thankful of the partnership we've had this year.
You know, listening to Michael reminded me of something, and it's a phrase we've been using a lot in other contexts, right? You know, we think about education as a way to help everybody make secure applications, right? But it's not going to scale. There's just no way. And you think about it, there are the 6 known forces and laws of physics, and then there's the 7th force, which is a developer who needs to ship their application for the business success, right? That's the strongest one of all. And they'll do whatever it takes to get the business success moving forward. And, you know, security will always come a little bit later than that until the business is already successful at some level. Like that. These are just the pragmatic trade-offs that people make. The path forward is one where things are secure by default, where the developer has to go out of their way to intentionally point the semiotic machine gun at their feet and start firing, right? We want to be in a place where, probably not the right metaphor these days, but I apologize. We want to be in a place where developers working on Node itself and developers using Node to build applications have secure by default patterns that they can just rely on and where as long as you don't go out of your way to do something wrong or insecure, you're going to be in a much better place than if you just sort of, you know, where you are today. And I think that is a theme that I would love to see sort of resonating across our work.
Brian?
Yeah, and this is more the other two Michaels kind of meeting, but there are 3 other things I wanted to throw in on this topic. One is, you know, one thing that the cloud native community has been doing, or did recently, is run something called the Cloud Native Security Slam, which I'll drop a link to here in chat, which was basically a challenge to their core kind of community to collectively focus on a set of security metrics and try to get everybody above a certain level. And I forget what that level was, but one of the tools that they built to use in this is something called the CLO monitor, which just tried to look at best practices and all this other kind of stuff. Whatever could be objectively measured and given a numeric score so that you could try to say, well, if we get everybody up to like 90 or something, then yeah, yes, right. But as a social thing, that was kind of cool because it helped kind of get a little bit of like competitive kind of juices going on something that normally people would rather not think about and rather not pay any attention to. So wanted to just cite that as something to be kind of cool to see other communities replicate in some way. The second thing I wanted to mention is it's looking like in 2023, the core OpenSSF, putting aside Alpha Omega, because again, that's the two Michaels, but speaking about where kind of the core OpenSSF is, it's probably going to be heading in a fairly opinionated direction. And what that means, we're still trying to figure out, but around supporting a set of tools that try to do the same thing for adjacent areas that SigStore did for signing of software artifacts. And we have a couple other things that are complementary, some of them mentioned here, but you know, think about what might be helpful in a supply chain setting to help get to what Michael referred to as kind of secure by default or just more rigor in kind of this supply chain kind of process. If you have ideas, if you want to help us try to figure out what would be the right kind of tools to come up with that could be plugged into your tool chain, into your dev practices, or those of your community, that would be awesome. The third is just thinking broadly about education. There's a lot of education resources, the OpenSSF, from the training module to guides for both consuming and producing open source code in security aware, conscious kind of ways. Would be interesting to figure out if like the Node community could have some sort of set of, hey, we expect you to read this before we give you maintainer privs on that or something like that. I might be controversial. I don't want to create, too much in the way of like certification requirements for pushing changes or anything, but there's going to be a difference between the people who kind of have at least avoided the basics of avoided the basic problems a lot of developers hit when they inadvertently create holes in their code, or just some basic awareness that I think would be helpful to everybody. So take a look at some of those resources. Think about where anything from the best practices badge to the training stuff to even the simple guides could be better promulgated throughout the Node community.
Jeffrey?
Hey, other members of the GSC, please let me know if this is like out of scope or the wrong place to bring this up. But so I lead the loaders team in Node, and that's like the part of Node that like lets you transpile TypeScript before you run it, or define mocks and things like that. And it was created because in ESM JavaScript, you can't do the things that people have historically done in Node, which is to like just monkey patch Node internals to be like, okay, require is actually going to be my function instead of the Node internal require and things like that. And we've been, as we've been doing this work, we've been like gradually increasing our scope, and we were going to change the name of the team to focus on, we were going to call it the customization team, and try to introduce like other APIs to basically eliminate all the places that users monkey patch Node, because that doesn't feel like a secure or safe thing to do, and it is fundamentally not like supported like through Semver and so on, because like our internals will change, and that's not like part of the contract as like a public API. So there's that, if monkey patching is like within this scope, and kind of related to that is some of the biggest people that use that feature or that pattern are instrumentation vendors. Like we've been helped a lot by Stephen Bellinger. He's a QARD on GitHub. He works for, I think, Datadog. I've had other people I think work for New Relic. And they do a lot of this kind of stuff, and I think that they would be like the prime beneficiaries of basically more APIs that observe the various things that their customers want to see of a running app in safer ways. again, I don't know if this is security necessarily or falls under the banner of security. So stop me if this is all like off topic, but you know, if you're looking for additional areas, then this is something that we've definitely struggled to get people to work in this area. And, you know, I've been a little frustrated that the instrumentation vendors who profit off these products don't really contribute much back in these areas. So it would be a place that we could use some help.
So this is obviously, I'm not well versed in the innards of this, but I've monkey patched things in the past. I think that one of the interesting problems of sort of supply chain security as a whole is you have a rich dependency graph of things. They are constantly changing. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, but those giants have been drinking and they're running at full speed. And monkey patching is where those giants now get together and make strange new combinations of behaviors that make it even more complicated to reason about the software. Because, you know, this thing unknown to me is changing the behavior of a package, or maybe, you know, changing its attack profiles or risks or whatever. One of our best working partners, this gentleman, Jonathan Meadows, who talks about applying intentional intelligence and risk assessment to your supply chain and looking at the components you have. And so if you have a set of components and some of them are actively doing monkey patching, I'd like to know that. I'd like that to be an attribute of and enforced by the system of something that says, I do no monkey patching, great. I know you to be pure and immutable. Something says, I need to do monkey patching, great, say so, and I can then apply risk management to that. Because I think about it from the perspective of somebody consuming it, whether it's in the Node platform ecosystem or the broader Node ecosystem, what am I taking on as risk when I'm running somebody else's software on my systems is a fundamental question. I don't know if I answered your question, Jeffrey, or not, but that's what came to mind when you started talking about that. So.
Yeah, I think to answer your question a little bit, just about all of the instrumentation vendors do quite a bit of monkey patching, but that's largely because they don't have APIs to
Right.
do what they want to do in any other way. So we're trying to build such things, but it's a very slow process because there just aren't people, you know, inspired to do the work, essentially. And the companies don't want to invest in it because they have a solution that works. So
I think that
Well, you're muted, Dawson.
Okay. I was going to say, I think if I hear your ask, it's like, you know, we're talking about ways that the OSSF can help support the Node project. And I think the ask is, hey, should we be looking at the work on loaders as an improvement to the security baseline or security tools, like by moving, you know, the legitimate uses of it to these APIs? That means that maybe we could do something like the other Michael was suggesting, flag when you're using monkey patching. So I just wanted to make it, I think that's what the ask was, like, hey, could we apply maybe some of the support we have for security to moving the loaders part forward?
yeah, just to be clear, this wouldn't be loaders specifically. This would be like the beyond scope of, you know, stuff that came out of the loaders discussions of broader things that are customization, like they monkey patch to observe all incoming and outgoing network traffic and things like that. So it's not like a loader specifically, it's that they use the monkey patching that loaders can provide in order to hijack like these other core things to be able to observe whatever activity they're trying to show in like instrumentation dashboards.
Yeah, I think Michael already answered what I was supposed to say, but yeah, if we find that, okay, monkey patch is not cool, we don't want to have it on Node.js or even JavaScript, and then we find, okay, how can we support vendors that make use of it? I think that's how it correlates, and that's how it makes sense. But yeah, that would be a very difficult operation, right?
I think one of the things that we've talked about, you know, internally on like what we trying to drawing a line around the things that we thought was appropriate for us to fund and things that we thought it wasn't. And this is evolving over time, and you know, everything is on the table. But you know, I think things that directly improve the security of the engage, you know, in this case Node, clearly in the circle. Features that like performance improvements to Node. Definitely not in scope. Things like preventing monkey patching. I don't know, that's kind of right along the line in my view. So maybe it's in, maybe it's out. I wouldn't worry too much about like, let's try to be precise here. If you can make the argument that monkey patching in its current state presents a risk to users of Node because modules abuse it and do all sorts of things that they shouldn't. That makes sense to me. I think I support that. I mean, I guess what I would hope, if we look out a month from now, or whenever we get to a point where we want to like make a decision, that list of, I don't know where like that particular issue falls in your list of things that worry you. Certainly, you all know this way better than Michael and I. So we're relying on you to say, if we could only do, if we have a list of 30 things and we could only do the top 3, these would be the top 3.
Ed, Mike, I'm gonna jump in because I had the interesting pleasure the other day of doing a review of security sort of risks and interventions for a whole bunch of products. And we sort of had a nice matrix of red, yellow, and green and different dimensions of risk and the product names like that. But then I put over the whole thing, all of this data is anecdotal. Therefore, that is the highest element of risk, right? We literally don't know how well we know what we know. And I think one of the things that we're keen to learn, honestly, back from you is the results of the audit work that you have and your ability to sort of come up with like, what are the threat assessments that we have to think about? What are the, where is Node at risk? Where is Node creating risk for others? And understanding those to help prioritize it, because, this is a target-rich environment. There is no lack of things to go off and worry about and think about. But creating a culture in your organization where you're actually able to make, research, analysis, and data-driven decisions around risk, around security, and that becomes a normal part of your TSC operations, your business priorities, and so forth. That is actually what we want. That's the goal. Sorry, there was a comment from someone I couldn't read it. It flashed by, so I won't.
Someone was asking about the significance or lack thereof in security terms of monkey patching. I was just pointing out that probably something that everybody here realizes is that, in its current form, a transitive dependency buried somewhere can alter the behavior of built-in modules, or that it's a potentially significant security.
It's a huge. I mean, that's I think whoever said that said better than I did.
Problem facing Node is a whole other. There's as you just said, there's a whole bunch of things that all sorts of technologies face, and whether that's the thing we want to focus on is. And whether we want to deal with the performance trade-offs of suppressing monkey patching in various places, et cetera, et cetera. But that's way outside the scope of what we want to talk about today.
Jeffrey, it sounded like you had something else. No?
I was just gonna say it's more of a shorthand for like getting into internals. Like it's internal Node stuff that is not meant to be accessible to user code or third-party code that user code depends on. I think our like official security threat model is that like we trust the code that people tell the runtime to run, and if you have code that you shouldn't be running, that's your problem, kind of thing. But even though that's like the official, our official statement, it's sort of like, well, even still, why not try to enforce best practices as much as we can? And so that's why I kind of feel like it is kind of borderline, like, is this a security question or not? And yeah, I'm sure there's probably many higher priorities than this, but it's maybe something to at least add to the list, and then it could sit at the bottom of the backlog or not, but just thought I'd bring it up.
Yeah,
Folks, yeah, go ahead.
For monkey patching specifically, we do have a mitigation, but I think what Jeffrey is saying is basically, okay, we do have it, but vendors need to instrument the code in a different way. Like the users can't use it and use an APM or Datadog, New Relic, it doesn't matter, because we don't have a support for that. But I think that's out of scope.
So if there are no questions, I have questions. So there's a lot of people here. I've only met a few of them. I would love to hear, honestly, like, how much has the work so far shown up in your radar? Because I think, as Michael hinted earlier on, one of our goals here is for this to become a cultural norm. Well, how's that going? I mean, it's just forcing chaos on the meeting by asking everybody to unmute and speak at the same time and seeing what can possibly happen. But
well, that's why we have a raise hand feature. So,
yeah.
But I would say that Raphael's work and the work of the one person from Trail of Bits has certainly showed up on my radar. I don't know about everybody else. OpenSSF more broadly sort of pops up here and there, but like, if someone had asked me before this meeting, like, name something OpenSSF has achieved for Node.js, I'm not sure I would have been able to name something specific other than the availability of resources and money. But that may say more about what I pay attention to than about OpenSSF. I would be really interested to know what Nikita thinks, but I don't know if he's prepared to speak. And I'll put my hand down now.
Nikita, we won't hold you to your answer here. We're looking for like impression. Fine.
Yeah, Nikita did mention his mic isn't working, so.
Michael, do you think it might make sense to show what we were discussing in the security working group for the futures initiatives?
Sure.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you're asking me? I'm sorry. Hey, Michael.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot that there are three Michaels.
Yeah, I think that's useful. I didn't know if that fit into the flow where Michael was looking for feedback from people, but
I'm like, I can't stand a dead point in a conversation. So if we reach the point where nobody else has anything to say, you know, move on, keep talking about other things. That's fine. So
yeah. As mentioned in the issue in the slide, we were discussing about like future initiatives since once we completed 3 of the 4. And one thing that I really would like to discuss here is the possibility to improve our process of a security release. And I think here is the best place to discuss. Nowadays, there's a huge problem when performing security release from dependencies. Let's say OpenSSL just bumped a security release and just sent us a message telling that tomorrow it will be available. It means that if the OpenSSL release a critical patch, we need to bump Node.js if that's a fact too. And usually the security process, the security release from Node.js is, let's say, requires a lot of work. And what I am trying to do is basically to enforce the communication with the Node.js and its dependencies. Like, let's say, usually we receive a new update from OpenSSL through the email, through the support. But I think it would be great to be, I don't know, more active in our dependencies and see if we can receive an early patch so we can assess earlier and also check if it affect Node.js or not. Because let's say we can't, the security release normally requires 4 releasers, and it's, let's say, you need to do it 1 week in advance. And when they bump a critical release, we need to do it ASAP. So it would be great to assess it first and check, okay, it doesn't affect Node.js, so we are good. We don't need to worry. I mean, we can update, but it can be in a regular release without problems. So this affects not only OpenSSL, but let's say zlib. It's also an important dependency that I really would like to get an early feedback so we can discuss earlier.
I think, Raphael, you're raising a really interesting problem here. And I'll start with a sort of broad pontification, which is, I think as an industry right now, we're still relying on, honestly, sort of gray-haired social networks of trust around information disclosure of like critical vulnerabilities. And it very much depends upon who you know, how well you know them, and the trust levels that are already there. That is not a scalable path. I don't pretend to have a solution for this at all. It's something I worry about, but I don't have like, actionability on them. But it does raise the question in terms of like how well Node has operationalized your sort of incident and emergency response sort of patterns, right? Because, when these things come along and they turn into like, fires and fire drills, history has shown that produces less than effective responses, right? And the more you can operationally normalize that, I think that's important, and also makes it easier for organizations to trust you by coming and saying, yep, we're going to put you on our early disclosure list because you've shown that you've got an operational model for handling it. So I think that's an area where I would love to hear what you're doing right now and how you could imagine improving it. But I think that the first step towards you're talking about, I think, is to start operationalizing internally how you handle that sort of report.
Michael Dawson.
So yeah, adding on to that, I think I'll say that exact aspect is part of the reason that I think we ended up with the help from the OSSF. In that, in those fires, that's actually a pretty tough place to get people to volunteer to be those firefighters, right? And as an open source project, there's some people who come from companies, but even the people coming from companies, they're really volunteering where they put their time, because very rarely do the companies actually say, we're giving you this amount of time to support this particular thing. We do have like only one case where we have that. That's the security stewards, where we have people who like their companies said, yes, we support you to do this specific piece of work. So I think, open source in general needs to figure out, either one, how do we get companies more involved in supporting the specific things to fight those fires? And then otherwise too, to get, things like the OSSF supporting us in basically funding people to fight those fires, which has been great. And so we have people we can depend on. I think like in terms of, the processes, I'm not so worried about that part because we've got them well documented. Somebody will say it's a 42-step process to get a security release out. But I've onboarded probably 2 or 3 new security stewards in the last months. And they've been able to pick it up with actually, some support, but not too much support because it's well documented. The releasers as well, I think, have done a good job of onboarding new releasers and having them do security releases. And so I think our biggest, like for our project, we've been doing it long enough that we have the processes. We've got them documented. The challenge really is the mismatch between a volunteer and the fire. And how do we solve that for open source is where I think the challenge still is. We're better off now because we're getting the support from the OSSF, but not everybody has that. And how do you make that a sustainable thing over the years, right?
Does Node get early access into vulnerable? So, OpenSSL being just one, but, I would classify Node as a critical project. And as such, I think, you stand apart from most others in that you do need access to things before they are public. I was wondering if you already have those ties, or if that's something that you think you should have also.
That's exactly what Raphael was suggesting.
Okay.
Was one of the things we look at this year. And we do have, like, if you look at some of those suggestions, improving our dependency, how we manage our dependencies, or like how we build them, is on the list. It's like let's make it not ad hoc. Make sure we have good documentation, because that's a place where our documentation of how we would build like specific ones isn't necessary, or update isn't as good as it could be. I think we're going to update that, automating it, so that actually somebody doesn't have to follow instructions. We've got actions that do it. And then as Raphael related to that is like, and can we also get a closer relationship with them so that we could even get the patch in advance? So, I think Rich has his hand up.
I would say the other place besides OpenSSL where we kind of have a relationship, whether whether we get patches as early as we want to, like we want them earlier from OpenSSL and things like that. But the other place where we have early access is V8. I think we have like relationships there, which is obviously very helpful. Not sure if there's other components where we don't have that kind of access. Because like libuv we do, and obviously in DCHI we do things like that. But the other place though where there is potential risk that we don't necessarily think about because it's not part of the code that goes into the binary is potentially in our build and release infrastructure. And I don't want to talk too much about that in a public session, but that's something worth talking about at some point. Yeah. Someone was pointing and reacting with some sort of thumbs up.
So things like that, wherever the time is right to have those conversations, things to harden, build, and CI infrastructure is right in the middle of the circle. So,
and I'm going to offer this. I don't know what your build infrastructure looks like, but I've seen an awful lot of organizations and their build infrastructures and their CI, and it's a very blurry and messy line, and it tends to turn into a write-only space because nobody wants to break the thing that works right now.
Yeah, and it goes beyond that with us because we're volunteers. Nobody's actually responsible for keeping it running. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but only a little bit of one.
I get it.
Had back and forth about, do we want to pay people to do this? Because then what does that say to the people who are volunteering their time, and so on, anyway, yeah, there's just a lot going on there, not just technically, but also socially and like sort of politically. So it's a really big mess. And yeah, so anyway, I'm going to stop there.
With almost unactionable, but some interesting advice, I will tell you that teasing out the execution, like at Google, we've really intentionally layered this machine out, right? Like if you blur it all into the build CI thing and it's all running in the Jenkins server in the closet, well, the Jenkins server in the closet is the beast that's going to eat your world, right? And we get very crisp about the execution environment at which the build runs, the build itself, orchestration and testing, manana, push those out and starting to really like create smaller chunks of builds that then get orchestrated, composed together, makes it easier for you to start securing each of those things one at a time and simplifying them, and simplify, because you can't secure complex.
Michael has his hand up. Michael Dawson has his hand up, so I'm going to give the floor to him. But first, I'm going to read a comment that Nikita put in the chat. This goes back to monkey patching, though. It says, "I'm not completely convinced that frozen intrinsics works in a way that people would expect it to work. Frozen intrinsics is what we used patching. We can get into that some other time." And I see Raphael has an additional comment there. Yes, it doesn't, but it's fixable at least. Go ahead, Michael Dawson.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, build support has been a long-term ask from the project in terms of, like, again, not a great fit with the volunteers. Like, we have a really good set of volunteers who do a lot of great work, but in terms of let's improve the infrastructure, as you said, once you've got things working, you don't necessarily want to break them. And so we've got a lot of great infrastructure. We've got people who help keep it working, but like, it's been the ask to say, like, again, if we could figure out in an open source project how you fix that mismatch between, like, if it's broken, you need to fix now, not 2 weeks, a week from now when the volunteer has time. And we've managed to keep it going. And we do have some things, like the people who set it up in the beginning, put some thought into it. We have separate build and release environments. So like our testing is one whole infrastructure, and then we have a much smaller release infrastructure that's actually used to do with the release builds. There's far fewer people who have access to that. And so they did think about a lot of those things, and I think did a good job. It's just, again, how do you keep the grind of these things, which are not the bit like we talked about on the security side. They're interesting to some people, but the grind of the day-to-day, we don't have pagers, but like you'd almost want pagers, because when things are down, you want to fix it sooner than later, right?
Yep. There we go. Now that I'm unmuted, I'd add to that, Michael, that you talked about how like we have levels of privilege on the build / release CI infrastructure side. We've had problems, and I think we have problems where quite probably a majority of the people who have the ultimate keys to the kingdom are not in fact around. Like they're people who were once very deeply involved in the project, and like we hear from them once in a long while now. And so, there's definite, so like, it's like we have the privileges segregated, we have separated out, we have the privileges appropriately cordoned off, but like not necessarily with the right group of people, in my opinion. And we have issues around how do we figure out how to trust someone enough to give them more privileges, and a lot of it has to do with do they work for an employer who will sanction them if they do something malicious, or and things like that. And we don't even do that strictly necessarily, but this kind of like it's all very kind of like loose cultural governance, and not really. It feels like we could do a lot more to lock it down, like how we operate. I don't know if you disagree with that, Michael. And it's fine if you do, but that's
I would.
my impression.
I agree with the challenge. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, well, I want to switch this. I want to change the subject. So actually, what you're going to say, but then I'm going to just put my hand right back up again.
I agree with the second part of like that there is the challenge around how we get more people with the privileges. Some of the people who aren't quite as active, I still have, we have a deep level of trust. So it's not like I'm worried about that other side of things, but I think we should move on to other topics for now.
Yeah, but that's a whole like, oh yeah, I'm not worried about them. Like that would never fly in a different environment, let's say. And I'm not sure it should fly in our environment. Perhaps it should. Also, I will say that unsung here. I mean, there's a few there's a few companies that give a lot in this regard, and they should be praised, but in particular IBM and Red Hat, yes, are doing more than their share on the build infra side. So shout out to IBM and Red Hat. That said, I'm going to do that really annoying thing where we have about 5 minutes left. Colin, did you have anything you want to say on any of this stuff, security wise?
Nope.
How about you, Beth?
A couple of things I mentioned in the security issue. A few of us build folks, Michael, Richard, Stuart, etc., are looking at Salsa and how we can meet some of the requirements to move up the level. We're at the point of just like copying it into a spreadsheet, seeing where we're at, doing kind of an audit, and then from there we will raise actions. I know Stuart's particularly interested in like reproducible builds and things like that. So there is some work already going on in that space. And then the other one is Sigstore. So there have been some discussions about using Sigstore to sign Node.js releases. And there's some discussions going on in that space that have come back a while. We are in contact with Luke Hines, if OpenSSF folks know him from Sigstore. So he's helping us put together a proposal of how we might leverage Sigstore and how actually the value would be surfaced to end users. Maybe we need to speak to NVM, the node version manager, to see if they want to do the verification or something like that. So yeah, those are two topics we're kind of already exploring. I'm sure at some point help might be, it'd be good to reach out for some help as we go through those processes. That's all.
A quick +1 on partnering with NVM, because, NVM is effectively the trusted client that people will invoke to bring down a version of Node, and they trust it to do the things that it's going to do for them. And so, they're not going to worry about whether the node is thing assigned. Something has to. And this is, again, by the secure by default mindset. If his NVM is implicitly verifying, and somebody has to go out of their way to change NVM or turn a flag off to let NVM bring down an unsigned build, that is a beautiful thing, right? Yep. It prevents all kinds of attacks. So +1 to that. Let us know how that goes. We'd love to have that conversation. And then just one more note, the salsa process very much intended to just start by leveling yourself up one level at a time in one rubric at a time, because it's about incremental progress. It's not about trying to get to level 3 or 4 all at once. So that's a cultural lesson from what we did at Google with BCID.
Franzi, do you have anything you want to add to this conversation?
Nothing from my side, but thanks for checking.
Ruben, do you have anything?
No, I'm good.
And last of the people who haven't said anything, Antoine?
Yeah, maybe something to say about Corpac and the security model here. If we invest more on this, so the Corpac is a package manager, and there's like an open issue since the beginning of the project to have a project manager sign their releases, so Corpac could verify it. And yeah, the effort has not been done by the package managers. Maybe that's also something we could look at in this report. Yeah, that's all for me.
All right, that completes my going around and asking everybody who hasn't said anything if they have something they want to say. Everybody on the TSC side. I don't know if you want to do it on the foundation side or not.
I just had one question for Brian Bellendorf. You mentioned training. Is there like one in particular that you would recommend for this project?
I think it's LFS 121 is the name of that. Is the number, but it's on the Linux Foundation's training portal, and it's basically 16 hours of content that helps you avoid all of the most common mistakes that lead to CVEs. And it's 14 hours well spent, I would argue. And you can get a certification with it that shows up on various websites. And I don't know, that would be like the big thing. The simplest thing is there's two things called the concise guides to choosing open source software and then to producing open source code with security in mind. So that's all I'd mention.
Thanks.
So as far as kind of next steps here, what we should absolutely continue this conversation. I think there's probably a, think about, in a little bit more specificity, what you would want to accomplish in 2023, t-shirt size, what you think that would take, how much of the work that you've done in 2022 do you want to just continue as is and just kind of re-up, and we should just kind of continue this conversation and get something good. This is great.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind this. I know this is a lot of people to ask to attend, but I wouldn't mind this happening pretty regularly. This is really great from my perspective.
Well, I think you've just made my day, because I think that having a regular conversation about security within your organization is pretty much outcome number one that I care about. And so, we're running out of time here. I just want to thank all of you for the efforts you put in and making this possible. Having us today is great conversation. As Michael says, it's the beginning of a conversation towards much longer work. We are still sort of trying to understand from our perspective what our long-term business model is. Are we a funding conduit for everybody's security needs across the whole space and all the money flows through us? That seems crazy. I would like to understand, Robin, in particular with you, like, what are the funding models that you have for the rest of your efforts, things like that? And it sounds like there's an awful lot of in-kind support and not a lot of actual cash and paid people, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Right. Mm-hmm. That's interesting and challenging. But I think that we know that the work that needs to be done. I mean, Michael Dawson cited that there are specific areas where we are contributing engineering resources with a specific set of outcomes in mind. Great. We have some outcomes to talk about. Let's see how we can start to use our pulpit, if you will, and our visibility. We've got more people joining the Alpha Omega from a funding perspective. That's going to help us continue our goals. Let's see if we can use that to draw other organizations into the node effort. Because again, it's about getting the work done, having, as Michael put it, people owning that work. It's one thing to pay trail of bits to do some work. It's another thing to actually have people whose job it is to do this on an ongoing basis. And that takes sort of a web of in support, because you don't want to have a dependency on any one organization or not to just continue survival. So very interesting.
Yeah, I would just want to add to that. It's like, if you can get to critical mass, it's an easier ask. Whereas if you, and that's been our challenge, it's like with one or two companies, it's hard for like me internally to say, hey, we should do it for the whole project, right? That doesn't work. But when it's like, hey, we should do our fair share along with the other 3 or 4 or 5 companies, that's a much easier sell internally. So it's like, how do we get to that 4 or 5, 6 companies? Because then I think it'll be easier, right? So if you can help with that.
So let's make that an explicit goal of the next level of engagement. What we're trying to do, right, is how do we get to critical mass? We've done, I think, an obvious set of things. We now know there's an infinite list of long things to do, which we could just sort of throw money at, and Trail of Bits will retire rich long before we do. And I'm being facetious here, but let's make an explicit goal of like getting to a sustainable pattern here, because that's something that Michael and I have talked about as like, one of our challenges is how do we turn this from bootstrapping into sustainable models? Let's talk about that in that light. I think it's exactly the right mindset, and we'll see what we can do.
Awesome.
The other thing I want, just before we close, is I wondered if the same call with the CPC's security collaboration space makes sense, because like there's a few things that I would maybe suggest, but aren't really Node project specific. They're more the JavaScript ecosystem. So having the same kind of discussion in that group might make sense. Was a suggestion I wanted to make.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Great. Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, thanks everyone.
Right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks everyone, and appreciate everybody participating.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye.